If you clicked on this video because Shutter Island has been rattling around in your brain for years and you still feel like there are pieces you can't quite put into place, then you're exactly where you need to be. By the time this is over, you'll understand why every strange glance, every awkward pause, every drop of water and flicker of fire was steering you somewhere long before the ending ever spelled it out. This is one of those films that doesn't just end when the credits roll. It lingers, it mutates, and it quietly dares you to watch it again with new eyes. Shutter Island is one of those movies that lived rent-free in my head for a long time, even though I'd only actually seen it a handful of times. It's strange how certain films do that, planting ideas in your subconscious that you don't fully realize are there until you revisit them years later. After picking up the 4K Blu-ray and sitting down to really analyze it scene by scene, I was blown away by how much Scorsese had layered into this film. Details I'd subconsciously absorbed on my first watch suddenly snapped into focus, and the movie shot up several levels in my estimation. What already felt like a great psychological thriller revealed itself as something far more intricate and haunting. This isn't just a twist movie, it's a carefully constructed descent into a broken mind. Throughout this breakdown, we're going to walk through why Shutter Island works so well, why it feels so unsettling even when you think you know where it's going, and how the ending is earned rather than pulled out of thin air. We'll talk about the clues, the misdirections, the symbolism, and, of course, the final choice that leaves people arguing years later.
I'll be honest, I was one of those people who guessed the general idea of the twist very early on during my first viewing. The concept that it's all in someone's head is a familiar trope, one we've seen explored in stories like The Twilight Zone, Fight Club, The Machinist, and plenty of others. When you're tuned into that kind of storytelling, the opening moments of Shutter Island practically wave a little flag at you. Even the title itself is playing games with you. Shutter Island can be rearranged to spell truth and lies, which is about as blunt as symbolism gets without outright spelling it out. If you really want to stretch it, you can even rearrange it into Ted Hunt's Liars, which neatly ties into Leonardo DiCaprio's character initially calling himself Teddy Daniels. That name later shifts to Edward Daniels before we finally learn the truth. He is Andrew Laeddis. Even that name is an anagram of Edward Daniels. The film is constantly telling you that identity here is flexible, unstable, and deliberately obscured. When we eventually meet the real Laeddis later in the film, he has a massive scar running across his face and through his eyebrow. It's easy to overlook, but Teddy himself also has a cut through his eyebrow. That wasn't accidental. DiCaprio was given that detail by the makeup department to visually signal that these two men are one and the same. It's subtle, but it's there from the start, just waiting to be noticed. One of the most impressive things about the ending is that it never feels like a cheap trick.
This isn't a movie that withholds the truth just to shock you in the final 5 minutes. Instead, it quietly plants signposts everywhere. On rewatch, it almost feels like the film is daring you to catch on sooner. Right from the beginning, we're introduced to Teddy on a boat rather than on the dock. That detail matters. You'd expect a U.S. Marshal arriving for an investigation to meet his partner on solid ground, but instead, Teddy meets Chuck while already in transit. This suggests that the game has already begun. The roleplay didn't start when Teddy arrived, it started before he even set foot on the island. Chuck, who we later learn is actually Dr. Sheehan, is introduced not as a separate character entering Teddy's life, but as someone who already exists within the fabricated narrative. That truth is subtly exposed during one of the early interviews with a patient. When the patient hears the name Dr. Sheehan, she briefly glances toward Chuck. It's a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, but it gives the whole thing away. That scene is packed with details like that. Behind the patient and Teddy, there are guards standing watch, but when the camera cuts to Chuck, there's no one guarding him. That's because Chuck isn't a marshal, he's a doctor. Then there's the infamous water glass moment. The patient lifts a glass to her mouth, but if you freeze the frame, you'll notice something disturbing. The glass isn't actually there. The illusion breaks for just a moment before snapping back into place when the glass reappears on the table. This is one of the clearest visual indicators that we're operating inside a constructed reality. Water, as it turns out, is deeply symbolic throughout the film. We later learn that Teddy's wife drowned their children, an act that shattered his mind beyond repair.
That's why it's so important that the movie begins on water, and that our first real interaction with Teddy shows him violently seasick. The water is testing him from the start, probing at the trauma he's desperately trying to suppress. He even comments on it, setting the tone for what's to come. Notice how water is later removed from patients when it threatens to trigger him. The doctors are carefully managing his exposure, trying to keep the fantasy intact without pushing him too far. This also ties into the small but meaningful detail, the bandage on Teddy's head. Symbolically, it represents the guilt he's trying to cover up. It's a literal bandage over a psychological wound, the guilt of killing his wife. By the end of the film, when that bandage is gone, it signals that the truth has finally been exposed. Another subtle detail you might not consciously notice is how poorly Teddy's clothes fit him. On a first watch, it's easy to assume it's just the fashion of the era, but suits in that time period were typically tailored. The ill-fitting clothes suggest they were pulled off a rack specifically for this role play, reinforcing the idea that Teddy is wearing a costume, not living a real life. Sound design plays a huge role here too. There was no original score composed for Shutter Island. Every piece of music comes from existing compositions from the 1930s through the 1950s. Scorsese curated these tracks to create atmosphere, but they also serve a deeper purpose. The entire scenario is essentially an elaborate act put on by the asylum staff, and the music mirrors that sense of theatrical make-believe. It's like when you were a kid pretending to be someone else, complete with a mental soundtrack. The music reflects Teddy's internal narrative more than the external reality. When Chuck asks Teddy if he has a girl, we cut to a memory of his wife. Scorsese plays with our expectations here, intercutting images of water before freezing on her face. The freeze frame acts as a mental block, Teddy's mind refusing to complete the thought. Scorsese often uses freeze frames to tell the audience to pay attention, and here it's screaming that something is being deliberately suppressed. Teddy claims his wife died in a fire, which is the exact opposite of the truth. Fire becomes his mental substitute for water, a safer story to tell himself. Fire recurs throughout the film, especially in moments tied to his delusions. We see him smoking constantly, but he never lights his own cigarettes. Someone else always does it for him. He doesn't even carry his own pack. This isn't just character flavor, it's practical. Inmates wouldn't be allowed to carry matches or lighters. The control over fire mirrors the control over his illusion. Later, when he visits George Noyce, Teddy briefly seems to light a cigarette himself, but it vanishes when he stands. This moment may not even be real. Fire triggers hallucinations of his wife, reinforcing the idea that it exists primarily in his mind. When he meets the supposed Rachel Solando in the cave, a large fire dominates the frame, but Teddy is still shaking. If the fire were real, it would warm him. Instead, it's just another projection. Fire represents illusion. Water represents reality. That's why the lighthouse, the place where the truth is revealed, is surrounded by water. It's why Teddy's escape route always leads toward the dock. Meanwhile, Laeddis is often associated with fire, sitting in front of it, reinforcing that he's a construct Teddy uses to avoid facing the truth. Even the storm itself is suspect. We're told it's past, yet lightning still flashes. The destruction it supposedly causes is massive, yet in the end, everything looks fine.
There's no way repairs could have happened that quickly. Even a guard sarcastically remarks, "Nice night," during the storm, hinting that it may not be real at all. The storm serves to keep Teddy isolated, confined to the island, and symbolically, it washes away his delusions. When Teddy arrives on shore, guards surround him with drawn weapons. This isn't standard procedure for welcoming marshals, it's containment. They're wary of him because he's one of the most violent patients on the island. As they drive past a cheerful sign, the irony is almost comical. At the asylum, Chuck struggles to draw his gun and ends up handing over the entire holster. For a seasoned marshal, this makes no sense, unless he's not a marshal at all. In the garden, a patient shushes Teddy. Some interpret this as a warning to keep quiet, or he'll end up like her. The theory that she's been lobotomized fits disturbingly well, given her scars and vacant demeanor. Dr. John Cawley, played by Ben Kingsley, initially comes off as sinister, but he's actually the most compassionate figure in the film.
He orchestrates the entire experiment to save Andrew from a lobotomy. The Rachel Solando story, the anagrams, the fabricated mystery, it's all designed to lead Andrew back to the truth on his own terms. But understanding comes with unbearable pain. In the final scene, when Andrew calls Dr. Sheehan Chuck again, it's not confusion, it's a choice. When he asks whether it's better to live as a monster or die as a good man, he answers his own question. He chooses the lobotomy. He chooses peace over truth. And that's why Shutter Island endures. It's not about the twist, it's about what comes after it.